My husband canceled our anniversary trip. He didn't expect me to leave alone, but I did. And that's the thing that changed everything. It wasn't the trip itself, not really. It was the leaving. It was the moment I realized I could. I'm Rachel. I'm 41 years old. For 12 of those years, I've been married to Ethan. I've always been the planner, the organizer, the one who remembers the birthdays and the appointments and makes sure the bills are paid on time. I was the family's cruise director, its social secretary, its glue. That's what I used to tell myself. I was the glue holding everything together. For a long time, I thought that was a good thing, a noble thing. I thought it was my job to make our life run smoothly. I smoothed out every conflict, every argument. I absorbed the tension. My role was to make sure everyone was okay, especially Ethan. Ethan is 44. He's a man who likes to talk about stability. He talks about our marriage like it's a foundation, something solid he can stand on. But he never seemed to notice that I was the one constantly checking for cracks, patching the holes, making sure the whole thing didn't crumble. He talks a good game about partnership, but his actions rarely matched his words. I spent years making excuses for him. For us, he canceled a dinner reservation for my birthday. Oh, he was just exhausted from work. It was a really tough week for him. He forgot a promise he made. Well, he has so much on his mind. He's under a lot of pressure. I became an expert at reframing disappointment. I would take the hurt and I would file it away under circumstances or bad timing. It was easier than admitting the truth. It was easier than facing the fact that I just wasn't a priority. This trip was different. This was our 12th anniversary, 12 years. It felt significant, and for the first time in a long time, I felt this spark of hope. The trip was my idea, of course. I planned the whole thing. I spent weeks researching. I found the place. I booked the flights. I arranged everything down to the last detail. Ethan was on board. Or he seemed to be. He agreed it was a great idea. He said we needed it. We needed to reconnect. That was the word he used, reconnect. And I clung to that word. It felt like a promise. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was symbolic. It was supposed to be about us. Just us. No work, no friends, no distractions. It felt like my one chance after all these years to finally be the more important thing. I imagined what it would be like. Just the two of us. I thought about the conversations we would have, the kind we never had at home anymore. I was so excited. I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I packed my bag a week in advance. I made lists. I confirmed reservations. I took care of everything so that all he had to do was show up. That's all I needed from him. Just show up. The week before we were supposed to leave, I could feel the energy in our house shift. I was buzzing with anticipation. I'd talk about the things we could do, the places we could see. He would nod, but his attention was elsewhere. He was on his phone a lot, more than usual. I told myself it was just work. He was trying to get everything done before we left. That's what a responsible person does. I was a professional at justifying the knots in my stomach. I would see a message pop up from his friend Mark, and my heart would do this little dip, a tiny, familiar drop. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was letting my own anxiety get the better of me. I just needed to trust him, trust us. The trip was booked. The tickets were paid for. It was real. It was happening. He wouldn't cancel this, not this. This was our anniversary. It was too important. That's what I kept telling myself over and over again. A mantra against a creeping dread. It was 2 days before our flight. I had just finished my final packing. My suitcase was by the door. I had laid out the clothes I was going to wear to the airport. Everything was ready. I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had pulled it off. I had made this happen for us. Ethan came home from work. I remember I was in the kitchen. I was making a list of last-minute things to do before we left. He walked in, and he didn't have that pre-vacation energy. He had a different kind of energy. It was heavy. I knew, right in that second. Before he even opened his mouth, I knew. My whole body knew. It was like a silent alarm went off inside me. He stood there for a moment. He couldn't quite meet my eye. And then he started talking. He told me something had come up. He said it was important. It was Mark. His friend was having a big party. A last-minute thing, apparently. A huge get-together with people flying in from all over. He explained that it was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of event for Mark. He told me he had to be there for his friend. He said he couldn't miss it. And just like that, 12 years of justifications crumbled. All the excuses I had made for him, for us, they just turned to dust. He was canceling our anniversary trip. For a party, he didn't even look that sorry. He looked resolved, like he had made a decision and he expected me to just deal with it. He suggested we could just postpone our trip. We could go another time, next month maybe. He was so casual about it. It wasn't a discussion. It was a notification, an announcement. He had already decided what was more important, and it wasn't me. It wasn't our marriage. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, holding my pen. I could feel the silence in the room. It was so loud. He was waiting for me to react. He was waiting for the usual pattern to play out. The pattern was always the same. First, I would get quiet. Then my eyes would fill with tears. Then I would ask him why. My voice would be small. Then he would get defensive. He would explain all the logical reasons why his thing was more important, more urgent, more necessary than my thing. He would make me feel like my disappointment was an overreaction, like I was being selfish or emotional for wanting what we had planned. And then, eventually, I would give in. I would sigh. I would say I understood. I would swallow the hurt because swallowing it was easier than starting a fight that I knew I would lose. I would be the one to smooth it over. I would cancel the reservations. I would tell our friends that something came up. I would absorb the fallout, and he would be grateful. He would tell me I was so understanding. He would thank me for being so supportive, and we would move on until the next time. He was waiting for that. I could see it in his face. He was braced for the tears and the quiet disappointment, but he was confident in the final outcome. He was sure that Rachel, reliable Rachel, would eventually do what she always did. She would stay home. But something was different this time. I looked at him. I really looked at him, and I didn't see my husband. I saw a man who had taken my understanding for granted for 12 years. I saw a man who saw my feelings as temporary inconvenience he just had to manage. I saw my entire marriage laid out in front of me. A long, long line of canceled plans, broken promises, and postponed feelings. My feelings. And in that moment, I realized something. The problem wasn't the party. The problem wasn't Mark. The problem was that I had allowed myself to be the person whose plans could always be canceled. I had taught him that it was okay. I had spent 12 years teaching him that my boundaries were flexible, that my needs were negotiable. I looked at my suitcase, sitting there by the door, all packed and ready. I looked at the flight confirmation email I had printed out, and a thought entered my head. It was so clear and so simple. It wasn't an angry thought. It wasn't vengeful. It was just a fact. The ticket was in my name. The room was booked. The time off from work was approved. Everything was ready. The only thing that had changed was that he wasn't coming. So I took a breath, a real breath. It felt like the first one I had taken in years. And I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him why. I just nodded. I said, okay. And I turned around and went back to my list. Ethan was visibly relieved. The tension went out of his shoulders. He thought he had won. He thought the difficult part was over. He came over and put a hand on my shoulder. He told me he knew I was disappointed, but that he would make it up to me. He promised we would plan something even better. He was already moving on. In his mind, the problem was solved. Rachel was being reasonable. He went about his evening. He made a few calls, probably coordinating things for Mark's party. He seemed happy. I just kept moving. I finished my list. I went into the bedroom. I checked my bag one last time. He thought I was just going through the motions. He thought I was processing my disappointment in my usual quiet way. He probably assumed I would spend the next few days being a little sad, a little distant. And then I would get over it, like always. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea what was happening inside my head. The next morning, I got up. At the same time we had planned to leave for the airport. I got ready. He was still in bed. He rolled over and asked me what I was doing up so early. I told him I had things to do. He just grunted and rolled back over. I picked up my suitcase. I picked up my purse. I walked out of the bedroom. I walked through the house that I had managed for 12 years. I didn't look back. I went to the airport. I checked my bag. I went through security. My hands were shaking a little, but not from fear. It was something else. It was adrenaline. I sat at the gate waiting for my flight to board. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. Are you still mad? We'll talk tonight when I get home. He still thought I was at home. He thought I was just giving him the silent treatment. He thought this was just another little storm to wait out. I looked at his message, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no need to explain myself. I just felt quiet. I turned my phone off. The boarding announcement came over the speaker. I stood up, I got in line, I handed them my ticket, and I got on the plane. Alone. The feeling on that plane was indescribable. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't freedom, not yet. It was stillness. For 12 years, my mind had been a constant hum of activity. Planning, worrying, anticipating his moods, managing his schedule, managing my own feelings. It was a full-time job with endless unpaid overtime. And now, for the first time, it was silent. There was no one to worry about but me. No one's needs to anticipate. No one to please. The seat next to me was empty, and instead of feeling like a loss, it felt like space. It felt like room to breathe. I didn't know what I was going to do when I landed. I had no plan beyond just arriving. The whole trip had been planned for 2 people. Every dinner reservation, every tour, but I wasn't worried. The planner in me, the part that always had to have everything figured out, was quiet. I just sat there, and I let the silence be. When I landed, I turned my phone back on. There were a dozen missed calls from Ethan and a string of texts. "Where are you?" "Rachel, answer your phone." "This isn't funny." "Your car is gone. Did you go somewhere?" "Are you at your sister's? She's not answering." "Rachel, call me now." The panic in his messages was escalating. It was a kind of panic I had never heard from him before. It wasn't concern for my safety. Not really. It was the panic of a man whose world had suddenly tilted off its axis. The panic of someone who realized the rules had changed without his permission. I read the messages, and then I put the phone away. I got my bag. I found a taxi. I gave the driver the name of the hotel. The hotel I had booked for our anniversary. Checking in was the first real test. I walked up to the counter. I said my name. The person at the desk smiled and said they had my reservation for 2 people. I just nodded. I said my husband couldn't make it. I said it so calmly. My voice didn't even shake. There was no shame, no embarrassment, just a statement of fact. They gave me the key. I went to the room. It was a nice room. I had picked it out myself. It was a room for celebrating a marriage, and I was standing in it alone. I put my bag down, and I just stood there in the middle of the room. I expected to feel a wave of sadness. I expected the loneliness to hit me like a ton of bricks, but it didn't. I felt calm. I realized that the loneliness I had been dreading, I had been living with it for years. I was lonely in my own home. I was lonely in my own marriage. Being physically alone was nothing new. The only difference was that now there was no one there to pretend for. I didn't have to put on a happy face. I didn't have to act like everything was fine. I could just be. My phone started ringing again. It was Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. I sat down. And for the first time, I let myself think. Not about him, not about his party or his friend or his excuses. I thought about me. I started thinking about all the other trips. The smaller ones, the weekend getaways that became day trips. The day trips that became a let's just stay home and order a pizza. Each one was a small cancellation, a tiny betrayal. At the time, they seemed insignificant. Life gets in the way, right? People are busy. But now, sitting in that hotel room, I could see them all lined up. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a pattern. It was a system. A system where my desires were always the first thing to be sacrificed on the altar of convenience. His convenience. I remembered my 35th birthday. I had wanted to go to this specific restaurant for months. It was hard to get a reservation. I finally got one. The day of, he called me from work. He said he had to stay late. A project blew up. He was so apologetic. He promised he'd make it up to me. I canceled the reservation. We ordered takeout. I spent my birthday night listening to him complain about his boss while I ate noodles out of a cardboard box. I remember feeling that familiar pang of disappointment, but I pushed it down. I told myself that being a supportive partner meant understanding these things. Now I see it differently. A supportive partner would have moved mountains to not miss his wife's birthday dinner, or at the very least, he wouldn't have let it become a habit. Then there was the time my best friend moved away. We were planning a small going-away party for her, just a few of us. Ethan had promised to be there. He knew how much this friend meant to me. An hour before the party, he told me he was going to go to the gym instead. He said he'd had a stressful day and needed to blow off some steam. He suggested I go to the party and he would catch up with me later. He never showed up. I spent the whole night making excuses for him. Oh, Ethan got held up at work. He sends his love. I was lying to my own friends to protect his image, to protect the image of our stable marriage. Why did I do that? I did it because it was easier than admitting my husband chose the treadmill over my feelings. It was easier than facing the humiliation of it. Each time I did that, each time I covered for him, I was sending him a clear message. The message was, it's okay. Your needs come first. My feelings are secondary. I will handle it. I was the shock absorber. And I was worn out. Sitting in that quiet hotel room, thousands of miles from home, it was like a fog was lifting. I started to see my marriage not as a love story, but as a long-term logistical arrangement. An arrangement where I was the manager and he was the star client whose whims had to be accommodated at all costs. My job was to keep the client happy. My own happiness wasn't part of the contract. When did I sign up for that? I didn't. Not consciously. It happened slowly. Incrementally, one small compromise at a time, one canceled plan at a time, one swallowed disappointment at a time. Until I woke up at 41, realizing I had compromised myself into a corner. The phone rang again. A new text message appeared. I know you're there. The airline confirmed you were on the flight. This is insane, Rachel. You're acting like a child. Acting like a child. That was his go-to accusation whenever I had an emotion he didn't like. If I was sad, I was being dramatic. If I was angry, I was being irrational. If I was hurt, I was being childish. It was a brilliant tactic, really. It meant he never had to take responsibility for the feelings he caused. He just had to dismiss them. And for 12 years, it had worked. I would hear that word childish, and I would immediately feel ashamed. I would second-guess my own feelings. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being too sensitive, but not this time. Sitting there, alone, I realized something revolutionary. My feelings were not childish. They were valid. Disappointment is a valid response to being disappointed. Hurt is a valid response to being hurt. It wasn't childish to want my husband to celebrate our anniversary with me. What was childish was a 44-year-old man who couldn't keep a promise. I didn't text him back. I ordered room service, just for me. I didn't even know what I wanted. I just ordered something. Or when it arrived, I ate. I wasn't really tasting it. I was just performing an act of self-care, nourishing myself. It felt strange. Every meal I had made for the last 12 years was planned around him. What did Ethan feel like eating? Was he trying to eat healthy this week? Did he have a long day? Should I make his favorite comfort food? I couldn't remember the last time I had asked myself, what do I want to eat? It was such a small thing, so trivial, but it felt huge. It was a crack in the foundation of my life. I spent the rest of the evening in the room. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat with my own thoughts. And the more I thought, the more I remembered. I remembered how he talked about my job. I worked part-time in administration for a small company. It wasn't a high-powered career, but I was good at it. I liked it. He always referred to it as your little job. How was your little job today? He didn't mean to be malicious. He just genuinely saw it as small. Unimportant, because it didn't make as much money as his job. It wasn't as demanding. My world, my ambitions, my accomplishments, they were all little compared to his. I remembered conversations about our future. He would talk about his 5-year plan, his 10-year plan, where he wanted his career to go, the promotions he was aiming for. He never asked me what my 5-year plan was. It was just assumed that my plan was to support his plan. My future was an extension of his. And the most terrifying part? I had assumed the same thing. I had so completely merged my identity with his that I had forgotten to have one of my own. I was Rachel, Ethan's wife. I was the reliable one, the supportive one, the understanding one. But who was Rachel? Just Rachel. I had no idea. I went to bed that night in a big empty bed that was supposed to be for 2, and I slept better than I had in years. I didn't wake up in the middle of the night to see if he was sleeping okay. I didn't lie awake worrying about his stress at work. I just slept. The next morning I woke up and I felt different. The stillness was still there, but it was mixed with something new, a flicker of curiosity. I had a whole day ahead of me, in a place I had always wanted to visit. And I could do whatever I wanted. There was no one to negotiate with, no one to compromise with. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had a list of things I had planned for us to do. I looked at the list: a museum I wanted to see, a park I wanted to walk through, a specific cafe I had read about. I had presented these options to Ethan weeks ago. He had been lukewarm about all of them. "Yeah, that sounds okay, I guess," was his standard response. He wasn't interested in museums. He thought long walks were boring. So I had mentally prepared myself to do the things he wanted to do, or more likely to do nothing at all, to just sit by a pool because that was the path of least resistance. But now, I could just go. I could go to the museum. I could walk in the park for as long as I wanted. I could sit in that cafe for 3 hours if I felt like it. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ethan. "Okay, you've made your point. I'm sorry, I screwed up. Are you happy now? Just tell me when you're coming home so we can fix this." Fix this? He thought this was a problem that could be fixed. He thought my leaving was a tactic, a move in a game. He thought I did it to punish him, to make a point. He didn't understand that this wasn't about him anymore. This wasn't a protest. It was a pilgrimage. I was on a journey to find out who I was when I wasn't performing the role of his wife. I left the phone in the room. I walked out of the hotel, and I started my day. Going to the museum alone was a revelation. I could spend 20 minutes staring at one piece of art if I wanted to. There was no one sighing impatiently behind me, no one checking their watch. I could move at my own pace. Rachel's pace. I didn't even know what my pace was. I was discovering it in real time. It turns out my pace is slow. I like to read all the little plaques. I like to wander. Ethan's pace is fast. He likes to get in, see the main thing, and get out. He treats experiences like items on a checklist. For 12 years, I had been speed walking through life to keep up with him. Now I was strolling. And it felt amazing. After the museum, I found that cafe I wanted to visit. I got a table for one. I ordered a coffee. And I just sat there. I watched people. I listened to the murmur of conversations around me. I didn't have to worry if Ethan was bored. I didn't have to try to keep a conversation going. I could just exist. And a thought struck me, so profound in its simplicity. I enjoy my own company. When was the last time I'd even been in my own company, without the ghost of his expectations hovering over me? I couldn't remember. That first day set the tone for the rest of the trip. Each day I would wake up and ask myself a simple question. What do I want to do today? And then I would do it. Some days I was a tourist. I saw the sights. I took the tours I had originally booked for 2, and I didn't feel a single pang of loneliness. I was just a person, experiencing a place. Other days I did nothing. I found a bench in a park and I read a book for hours. I had forgotten how much I loved to read. At home, there was never time. By the time I had managed the house, managed dinner, managed Ethan's mood, I was too exhausted to focus on a page. Here I had all the time in the world, and I started to feel like myself again. Or maybe I was meeting myself for the very first time. The Rachel who wasn't a wife, or a planner, or a peacemaker. The Rachel who liked museums and reading and sitting quietly in cafes. She was a person I'd neglected for a very, very long time, and I was starting to really like her. Ethan's texts and calls continued, but their tone shifted. The anger and confusion gave way to a kind of pleading. "Rachel, please, I get it. I messed up. I'm so sorry. The party was a bust anyway. I should have been with you. Just come home. We can talk. We can go to counseling. Whatever you want. Whatever you want." How many times had I longed to hear those words, but now, hearing them, they felt hollow. The words glowed on the screen of my phone, a beacon in the quiet dark of the hotel room. "We can fix this." The word hung in the air, foreign and strange. For 12 years, we had been a convenient pronoun Ethan used to assign me tasks. "We should really get the gutters cleaned. We need to send your mother a birthday card. We have to figure out a better system for the recycling." In every instance, the we was a royal we, and I was the subject tasked with its execution. The fixing, the planning, the remembering that was never a we. That was a me. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. The vibration of another incoming text buzzed against the wood, a frantic, impotent tremor. I didn't need to look. I knew the cadence of his panic. It would be followed by a question, then a demand, then a declaration of his love that felt more like a claim of ownership. It was a system. I was just now learning to see the blueprints. I slept. For the first time in what felt like a decade, I just slept. There was no mental list of tasks to review for the next day, no low-grade anxiety about a forgotten appointment or an unpaid bill. There was no one's breathing to monitor but my own, no one's rustling in the sheets to interpret as a sign of a bad dream or a restless mind. The other side of the king-size bed was a cool, empty expanse of white. It wasn't a void, it was space. The next morning, I woke up to the sun, not an alarm. The light sliced through a gap in the heavy curtains, painting a stripe across the far wall. I lay there for a long time, watching the dust motes dance in the beam. It was the kind of lazy, pointless observation I hadn't allowed myself since before I was married. My time had always been a resource to be allocated, a budget to be managed for the good of the household. My phone showed 7 new messages from Ethan. I swiped the notification away without reading them. The act felt like a small rebellion, like claiming a few more inches of my own territory. I showered and dressed in a way that was entirely for me. I chose a dress not because Ethan liked the color, but because the fabric felt nice against my skin. I didn't bother with the makeup I usually wore to smooth out the tired lines around my eyes. I looked at my face in the mirror, the face of a 41-year-old woman who had slept a full 8 hours, and I felt a flicker of recognition. Hello, there you are. Downstairs, I bypassed the hotel restaurant, which felt too formal, too full of pears. Instead, I walked down a cobblestone side street and found a tiny cafe with 2 round tables on the sidewalk. I took one of them. The waiter, a young man with a kind smile, took my order for a coffee and a croissant. It was simple, it was perfect. As I sipped my coffee, I remembered my 38th birthday. I had wanted to go out for brunch, just the 2 of us, to a place I'd read about that had a beautiful garden patio. Ethan had agreed, but the morning of, he'd woken up groggy and declared it was too much effort. Can't we just get bagels? He'd asked, already pulling on a sweatshirt. It's the same thing, really. It wasn't the same thing. It was never the same thing. The bagel was about convenience. The brunch was about the experience. It was about the garden and the pretty plates and the feeling of being somewhere special with the person who was supposed to make you feel special. I had tried to explain it, but my words felt flimsy against the solid wall of his indifference. He didn't get it because he didn't want to get it. It was easier not to. So we got bagels. I ate mine on the sofa, scrolling through pictures of the garden patio on my phone while he watched the golf tournament. I was the family's shock absorber, and I had absorbed that disappointment too. I had filed it away under a cabinet labeled things that aren't worth fighting about. I was only now realizing that the cabinet had become the entire foundation of our home. A new text message buzzed on the table. This time, I glanced at the preview. Ethan, I'm worried about you. Are you safe? Just tell me you're safe. It was a classic maneuver. He was framing his need for control as concern for my well-being. If I didn't respond, I was being cruel. I was making him worry. The responsibility, once again, was being placed squarely on my shoulders. I was supposed to manage his anxiety from hundreds of miles away. I took a bite of my croissant. The flakes scattered across the plate. I watched a pigeon peck at them on the cobblestones. I felt nothing. Not cruelty, not anger, just a profound and peaceful detachment. His worry was his to manage. For the first time, it had nothing to do with me. I spent the day walking. I had no destination. For a woman who had spent the last 12 years creating itineraries for family vacations, school projects, and even weekends, the lack of a plan was both unnerving and exhilarating. I was navigating by whim. I saw a sign for a small museum dedicated to the history of textiles. The old Rachel would have dismissed it. Ethan would have been bored to tears. He liked big, important museums with famous paintings he could recognize and take a picture of. He didn't have the patience for niche interests, for the quiet, detailed stories woven into a piece of fabric. But I went in. I spent 2 hours there. I learned about the evolution of lace making and the complex chemistry of natural dyes. I stood for a full 10 minutes in front of a 19th century wedding dress, marveling at the thousands of tiny, perfect stitches, each one a testament to someone's time, someone's hope. It was a quiet, contemplative space, and I was the only one in the gallery. I moved at my own pace. I read every single placard. No one sighed impatiently behind me. No one checked their watch. My pace, I discovered, was slow. I had been moving so fast for so long, trying to keep up with the life I had built, that I had forgotten the simple pleasure of a leisurely stroll. When I left the museum, blinking in the afternoon sun, I felt a sense of satisfaction so deep it was almost physical. It was a feeling of nourishment, as if I had just eaten a meal I'd been craving for years. I checked my phone. The barrage had continued, the tone had shifted. "Ethan, this is childish, Rachel. You're making a point. Fine, I get it. Now it's time to come home." "Ethan, Sarah called. She asked where you were. I had to lie. Are you trying to embarrass me?" "Ethan, I swear to God, when you get back, we are having a serious conversation." There it was, the pivot from feigned concern to undisguised anger. He wasn't worried about me, he was worried about himself, about his own comfort, his own reputation. My absence was an inconvenience, a logistical problem, and worse, a public relations nightmare. I had stepped out of my role, and in doing so, I had revealed that his life only functioned because I was constantly quietly working in the background. I wasn't his partner, I was his support staff. I found a bench in a small green square and sat down. I thought about his words. "When you get back." He still saw this as a temporary disruption, a tantrum. He thought I was on a leash and that I had simply run to the end of it and would eventually be tugged back. He couldn't conceive of a world where I had simply dropped the leash and walked away. The trip was booked for 5 days. This was day 3. The original plan was to fly home on Saturday. I thought about Saturday. I pictured myself walking back into our house. I saw the look on his face, a mixture of relief and righteous anger. I heard the lecture that would follow, the one about communication and partnership, all of it a monologue designed to reassert the old order. I would be expected to apologize for the worry I had caused him. I would be expected to be grateful when he forgave me. I would be expected to fix it. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline app. My thumb hovered over the My Trips section. My heart was beating a little faster, a steady rhythmic thrum. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. I looked at my return ticket. Saturday. I looked at the options. Change flight. I didn't change it. I canceled it. The confirmation screen popped up, offering a credit for a future flight. A future flight? Then I did something else. I opened a map of the region. I looked at the city I was in, a dot on a sprawling map of possibilities. There were train lines spidering out in every direction, leading to other cities, other towns, other quiet places with museums and cafes and parks. I picked one. A coastal town, about 3 hours away by train. I didn't know anything about it, I just liked the name. I booked a train ticket for Saturday morning. I booked a room in a small guest house with a view of the sea. It took less than 10 minutes. Click, click, done. I had just unwritten my own ending, or rather, I had written a new chapter. A final message from Ethan came through as I was putting my phone away. The anger had evaporated, replaced by the last-ditch tactic. Utter capitulation. "Ethan, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I love you. Please just come home. I'll do anything." I read the words, and for the first time, a wave of sadness washed over me. Not for him and not for the marriage we had, but for the marriage we could have had if he had ever seen me. If he had ever once chosen the brunch over the bagels. But his anything was a blank check he had no intention of ever cashing. I knew that now. His anything meant anything that would get me to come back and restore the system. I put the phone in my bag. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky a soft bruised purple. I didn't know what I would find in the coastal town with the pretty name. I didn't know what would happen after that. For the first time in my adult life, I had no plan. I was the cartographer of my own map now, and the edges were thrillingly, terrifyingly blank. I stood up from the bench and started walking, not toward my hotel, but toward the river, just to see how the last of the light would look on the water. I was in no hurry at all. The click of the mouse confirming the train ticket was a sound no louder than a whisper, but it felt like a door slamming shut on my old life. I had just severed the last thread connecting me to the itinerary I had so carefully planned for the two. The flight home was gone. In its place was a one-way ticket to a town I had only seen on a map, a place called Port Blossom, chosen for no other reason than its name sounded like a promise, and it was pressed against the sea. I closed the laptop. The hotel room, which had begun to feel like a sanctuary, now felt like a waiting room. My time here was over. I had one night left, and I spent it not with a sense of panic, but with a strange, methodical calm. I packed my small suitcase, leaving behind the one evening dress I had brought for our anniversary dinner. It was a relic from a future that no longer existed. I laid out my clothes for the morning: simple jeans, a comfortable sweater, walking shoes. It was the uniform of a traveler, not a wife on vacation. Ethan's text had changed tone. The anger and confusion had curdled into a desperate, pleading performance I knew all too well. "Rachel, please, just tell me when you're landing. I'll be at the airport. We can talk this out. Whatever you need, we'll fix it." Fix it. The phrase was so familiar. It was his go-to solution, a verbal patch he applied to any crack in the foundation of our marriage. It meant restoring the system, getting things back to the comfortable hum of his life being prioritized and my work being invisible. He wasn't promising to change. He was promising to repair the machine I had just broken. I didn't reply. I just slept. For the first time in years, it was a deep and dreamless sleep, the kind that isn't a frantic escape from the next day's to-do list, but a genuine rest. The train station was a beautiful chaos of greetings and goodbyes. I found my platform and stood with my suitcase, an anonymous figure in the crowd. There was no one here to see me off, no one to wave to through the window. The loneliness of it should have been a heavy weight, but it felt like buoyancy. I was accountable to no one. My schedule was my own. The train slid into the station, a long silver vessel ready to carry me away from the map I had drawn for myself and into the blank spaces. I found my seat, another window seat with an empty chair beside it. But this time, the emptiness didn't feel like an absence. It felt like potential. It was a space I was intentionally keeping clear. As the city dissolved into sprawling suburbs and then into wide green countryside, my mind drifted. It wasn't the big, dramatic betrayals that had led me here. It was the little things, the slow, patient erosion of myself. I remembered my 40th birthday, not the party Ethan had let me plan for myself, but the gift he'd given me. He had presented it with a flourish, a set of expensive, professional-grade watercolor paints, brushes, and heavy paper. "For your art," he'd said, smiling, "so you can get back to it." I had loved to paint. In my 20s, my fingers were perpetually stained with ultramarine and cadmium yellow. It was how I processed the world. But after we got married, life got in the way. The house, his career, the endless churning cycle of social obligations and family management. My easel was folded and put in the attic. My paints dried up. I had been so touched by the gift. I saw it as him seeing me, seeing that buried part of myself. I cleared a corner of the spare room. I set up the easel. For a week it stood there, a beacon of intent. Then Ethan needed the room for a series of conference calls. "Just for a few days, Rach. It's the quietest room in the house." I understood. I folded the easel and put it back against the wall. A week later, his brother needed to stay with us for a month between apartments. The spare room became his. The easel went back into the attic. I never took it out again. The expensive paint sat in their box, pristine and unopened. Every time I went into the attic to fetch holiday decorations or store seasonal clothes, I saw the box. It wasn't a beacon anymore. It was a tombstone for a part of me I'd let die. Ethan never asked about it, not once. To him, the act of giving the gift was the end of the transaction. He had done his part. The follow-through, the carving out of time and space, that was on me. But the system he and I had built didn't allow for that space. My time was the family's flexible resource, the buffer that absorbed every unexpected demand. There was simply no room. The vibration of my phone in my pocket pulled me back to the present. A new text from Ethan. "I paid the mortgage, And the quarterly taxes are due next week. The paperwork is on my desk if you can look at it when you get home. I stared at the words. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. So subtle, he probably wasn't even conscious of it. He was pulling me back into my role. He was reminding me that I was the manager, the one who handled the details that kept our life running. He wasn't just my husband, he was my boss, reminding me of my duties. It was a text designed to create anxiety, to make my freedom feel like a dereliction of duty. I was the shock absorber. I was the cruise director. I was the administrator of our shared life. I turned the phone off. I slid it into my bag and pushed the bag under the seat in front of me. I would not be summoned. Not anymore. Port Blossom was not a postcard. It was better. It was real. The train pulled into a small, wind-beaten station that smelled of salt and diesel. I stepped out onto the platform and the sea air hit me. A clean, sharp scent that felt like it was scouring my lungs of stale, recycled air. The town was a jumble of stone buildings and colorful clapboard houses clinging to a hill that sloped down to a working harbor. Fishing boats, not yachts, bobbed in the water. Gulls screamed overhead, their calls raw and wild. This was not a resort town, polished and preened for tourists. It was a place where people lived and worked, a place with its own rhythm. I walked, pulling my suitcase behind me, its wheels clattering on the old cobblestones. I had no destination. For the first time in my adult life, I was simply moving forward without a plan. I passed a bakery with fogged-up windows, a pub with a hand-painted sign, a bookstore with a cat sleeping in the window. I found a small guest house called The Anchor. A woman with kind eyes and gray hair braided down her back was behind the counter. "Just for one?" she asked, looking at my single suitcase. "Yes," I said. The word felt solid, true. "Maybe for a few nights, or a week. I'm not sure yet." She didn't ask any questions. She didn't offer pity or curiosity. She just nodded, as if having an uncertain plan was the most normal thing in the world. "The sea view room is open. It's quiet." "Perfect," I said. The room was simple. A bed, a small wooden desk, a window that looked out over the harbor and the vast gray expanse of the ocean. There was no television. There was no room service menu. There was just a room, the view, and the sound of the waves crashing against the seawall below. It was everything I needed. I unpacked my few things and walked back into town. In a small shop that sold a little of everything, I bought a sketchbook and a few charcoal pencils. I didn't know if I would use them. It felt like buying the paints all over again, a hopeful gesture. But this time was different. This time there was no one to reclaim the space, no one to interrupt the quiet. The time was mine. The space was mine. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking. I walked down to the harbor and watched the fishermen mending their nets, their hands moving with a practiced, unhurried grace. I walked along the stone pier until the wind was so strong I had to lean into it, the salt spray misting my face and tasting of freedom. I was tired when I finally returned to my room, but it was a different kind of exhaustion from the one I was used to. It wasn't the bone-deep weariness of emotional labor, of absorbing someone else's moods and managing someone else's life. It was a clean, physical tiredness from walking for miles, from breathing in the sea air. I sat at the small desk and opened the sketchbook. I looked out the window at the horizon, where the gray sky met the gray water. With a hesitant hand, I drew a line. It was wobbly and uncertain, but it was a start. It was a mark I was making on a blank page in a new town, in a life that was, for the very first time, entirely my own. I didn't know what I was drawing yet. I was just following the line to see where it would take me. The train pulled away from the station with a low groan, a final metallic sigh. I watched the city blur through the grimy window, the hard edges of the skyline softening into a watercolor wash of gray and steel. Each click of the wheels on the track was a snip, severing another thread that held me to my old life. I had packed a small bag in the city, just the essentials, things bought from a pharmacy and a small clothing store near the hotel. Toothbrush, a change of clothes, a nondescript gray sweater. I was a ghost, leaving a life that was already a memory. My phone, which I had turned back on for the sole purpose of booking the train ticket, buzzed again on the seat beside me. Ethan. Of course it was Ethan. I didn't need to look at the screen to know the tone of the messages. They had already cycled through bewilderment, then anger, then a sort of panicked bartering. "Just tell me what flight you're on." "We'll fix this, Rach. I promise." Fix it. The words echoed in my head. He meant he would restore the system. He would apply a patch, smooth over the crack, and expect the foundation to hold. He didn't understand that the foundation itself was the problem. It was a foundation I had helped mix and pour, a foundation built on my silence, my accommodation, my endless, wearying understanding. I remembered his promise from the night he'd cancel our anniversary trip. "I'll make it up to you." It was his favorite piece of currency, a promissory note he never intended to cash. It was the same thing he'd said 5 years ago, when he bought the boat. It had appeared in our driveway one Saturday morning, a sleek white thing with a ridiculous name, the Escape, already painted on the stern. He stood beside it, beaming, arms spread wide like a game show host presenting the grand prize. I had been balancing the budget at the kitchen table, trying to figure out how we were going to afford the new roof he'd agreed we needed. "It's an investment," he declared, his voice booming with a manufactured excitement that was meant to sweep me up. "An investment in us, Rach. Weekends on the water, getting away from it all." I just stared. I saw the price tag still dangling from the steering wheel. It was a number that made my stomach clench, a number that represented the roof, a kitchen renovation, and a half dozen other practical things we had discussed, things we had agreed upon. "Ethan," I had started, my voice quiet. "We didn't talk about this. That's the beauty of it. It's a surprise." He had bounded up the steps and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a capture. He smelled of sweat and motor oil. "Don't be the accountant right now, okay? Just be happy for us." Right, I was the accountant. I was the planner. I was the one who had to figure out how to rearrange the columns of our life to accommodate his impulsive dreams. The boat, the Escape, has become another job for me. I was the one who managed the insurance, the slip fees, the winter storage. We used it 3 times that first summer. The second summer, it sat under a blue tarp in the driveway, a monument to a whim. He said he was too busy with work. He said he'd make it up to me. I was the shock absorber for his dreams. I absorbed the financial impact, the logistical hassle, the silent, heavy weight of another promise that evaporated into thin air. He got to have the flash of the idea. I was left to manage the mundane, burdensome reality. The train jolted, pulling me from the memory. I looked down at the phone, its screen dark. His messages were piling up behind it, unheard, unread. They were part of a conversation I was no longer having. With a finality that felt like a quiet click in my own soul, I picked up the phone and held down the power button. The screen glowed, then went black. I turned it off. I just slept. I woke to the smell of salt. The train had slowed, and the landscape outside was no longer a blur of green fields, but a panorama of deep blue water and rocky coastline. The air that seeped through the old window frame was cool and clean. It smelled like freedom. Port Blossom wasn't a destination. It was a place you found. It was a small fishing town tucked away, sheltered by a curve of land that protected it from the worst of the ocean's moods. The train station was little more than a wooden platform and a covered bench. As I stepped off, I was the only passenger who wasn't being met by a waiting car or a familiar face. For a moment, a flicker of the old loneliness, the kind I'd felt in my own crowded house, sparked within me. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by something else. Stillness. There were no frantic texts to answer, no schedule to keep, no one's mood to manage. My time was a blank page. I walked down a street lined with clapboard houses, painted in shades of sea glass pale green, dusty blue, soft white. I found a small inn called the Salty Anchor, its sign swinging gently in the breeze. A woman with kind eyes and hair the color of sand gave me a key to a room on the second floor. It was simple, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a window that looked out over the harbor. The room was for one. There was one nightstand, one reading lamp, one chair. There was no empty space screaming of absence. It was simply complete. It was enough. I dropped my bag on the floor and walked to the window. Below, fishing boats bobbed in the water, their lines clinking against their masts in a gentle random music. I watched a fisherman mend a net, his hands moving in a rhythm that was ancient and unhurried. He was not performing. He was not rushing. He was just doing his work. The first few hours in Port Blossom, I did nothing. I sat in the chair and watched the light change over the water. I didn't read. I didn't make a plan. I just breathed. It was a radical act. My entire adult life had been a series of lists of tasks, of preparations for the next thing. My brain, so accustomed to multitasking, felt strangely quiet, like a factory floor after the machines have been shut down. It was in this quiet that I knew I had to do one last thing. It wasn't for Ethan. It was for me. It was the final closing of a door. I found a small library, a cozy brick building that smelled of old paper and wood polish. I sat at a public computer, the keyboard clicking loudly in the silence. I opened a new email, my fingers hovering for a moment. What did one say? What was the protocol for disappearing from your own life? I kept it simple. I kept it true. Subject, I am safe. Ethan. I am writing to let you know that I am safe. Please do not worry. I did not get on this scheduled flight home. I needed some time and I am taking it for myself. I am in a quiet place and I am okay. This is not a negotiation and it is not meant to punish you. This is something I have to do for me. I don't know for how long. I will be in touch when I am ready. Rachel. I read it over. It was stark. It was honest. It was unapologetic. There was no I'm sorry. There was no I love you. There were no soft edges for him to grab onto, no emotional loopholes for him to exploit. It was a statement of fact. My heart hammered against my ribs as my cursor hovered over the send button. This was it. This was the point of no return. This was the act that would turn his panic into a full-blown crisis. He would call my sister. He would call my friends. He would construct a narrative in which I was unstable, missing, having a breakdown. He would make himself the victim, the worried husband left behind by a wife who had inexplicably lost her mind. I knew, but I also knew that his narrative no longer had any power over me. His story was his to tell. I was finally writing my own. I clicked send. I closed the laptop, logged out of the computer, and walked out of the library into the late afternoon sun. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had lifted. It felt like I had been holding my breath for 12 years and had finally fully exhaled. I walked toward the harbor, toward the sound of the gulls and the smell of the low tide. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink. I walked past a fisherman who was packing up his nets for the day. He nodded at me, a simple, anonymous gesture of acknowledgement. I nodded back. I kept walking until I reached the beach, a wide open stretch of pale sand. I took off my shoes and left them where the dry sand met the damp. The cold, wet grains felt real and solid beneath my feet. The water rushed up to meet my ankles, shockingly cold, wonderfully alive. I looked out at the vast, unbroken line where the ocean met the sky. There was no map for where I was going. There was no itinerary. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't managing a single thing. I was just walking. I pressed send. The click of the trackpad was a small, insignificant sound in the bustling seaside cafe, lost beneath the clatter of ceramic and the hiss of the espresso machine. But for me, it was a sound like a lock turning, a door swinging shut. It was the final, definitive punctuation on a sentence I had been writing my entire adult life. It was done. I closed the laptop. The smooth metal cooled beneath my fingers. I didn't immediately get up. I just sat there, watching the foam of my cooling latte slowly dissolve. For a moment, I expected to feel a surge of panic, a tidal wave of regret. I braced for the familiar chill of having done something wrong, of having broken a rule. But there was nothing. There was only a profound and unnerving quiet in the space where the anxiety used to live. It was the first decision I had made in 12 years. That wasn't a compromise, wasn't a reaction, wasn't a carefully calibrated move on the chessboard of our marriage. It was just mine. Ethan wasn't a variable in the equation. His feelings, his reaction, his inevitable anger, I had accounted for them, but I hadn't catered to them. It was a new and terrifying freedom. I paid for my coffee and walked out into the afternoon. The air in Port Blossom was nothing like the city's. It was thick with salt and the faint low-tide smell of brine and wet stone. It felt clean. It felt real. I had no plan. I had a small suitcase, a credit card, and the clothes on my back. I, the family's cruise director, the master of itineraries and 5-year plans, had absolutely no idea what I was going to do in the next 5 minutes, let alone the next 5 days. I just walked. My pace was different here. In my old life, my stride was always purposeful, aimed at the next task, the dry cleaner, the grocery store, the meeting. It was a walk designed to get things done. Here I ambled. I let my attention drift to the window of a dusty antique shop, to the bright colors of the fishing buoys stacked on the pier, to the cry of a gull circling overhead. I was moving at my own speed, and I was just now discovering what that speed was. It was slow. It was curious. I knew I needed a place to stay. The idea of a hotel felt too anonymous, too much like the one I just left. I passed a small shingled building with a neatly painted sign that read the Seafoam Inn. A wooden porch was set with 2 rocking chairs, currently empty. It looked less like a business and more like a home. It looked quiet. A woman with kind eyes and hair the color of sea salt was behind the front desk, arranging a vase of wildflowers. She looked up and smiled as the bell on the door chimed. "Hello there," she said. "Hi. I was wondering if you had a room available," I said, my voice feeling rusty. It was the most I'd spoken to anyone in days. "Just the one?" she asked, her gaze gentle. "Yes, just me." The words felt strange and true. "You're in luck. Room 4, top of the stairs, best view in the house." She handed me an old-fashioned brass key attached to a heavy wooden fob. No plastic key cards, no magnetic strips. Just a simple, solid object. I paid for 3 nights, not knowing if I would stay that long or much, much longer. It felt like a manageable slice of an unknowable future. The room was simple. A comfortable-looking bed with a handmade quilt, a small wooden desk by the window, a faded floral armchair. It smelled of lemon polish and sea air. And the view. The woman hadn't been exaggerating. The window looked directly out over the harbor, where small fishing boats bobbed on the tide. It was a painting come to life. I dropped my suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed. This was it. This was the first moment of my new, undefined life. The laptop containing the sent email sat in my bag like a dormant volcano. I could already picture Ethan reading it. First confusion, then disbelief. He would read it again, trying to find the loophole, the hidden negotiation tactic. "She needs time." He would translate that into a language he understood. "She's upset, I need to fix this." He would see it as a problem, a logistical snag in the smooth operation of his life. He wouldn't see it as the final breath of a woman who had been holding hers for over a decade. He would think about what he had to do. Call me, find me, convince me. He wouldn't think to ask what had been done. I knew the pattern. It was a system. My hurt was a temporary bug in the software that he, with the right combination of apology and logical persuasion, could patch. He would be frustrated that my email offered him no entry point. "This is not a negotiation." That line would infuriate him. It took away his power, his ability to manage the situation back to the comfortable status quo. I lay back on the quilt, the silence of the room wrapping around me. For the first time, I felt the bone-deep exhaustion of the past 12 years. I wasn't just the planner and the shock absorber. I was the audience. I was the one woman standing ovation for his life, applauding his career wins, his impulsive hobbies, his grand pronouncements. And somewhere along the way, the theater had gone dark on my own stage. The next day, I explored. I found a bakery that sold scones so buttery they melted on the tongue, and a bookstore with crooked floors where a fat orange cat slept on a pile of mysteries. I walked along the rocky beach, collecting smooth gray stones, feeling their weight in my palm. I was a ghost haunting the edges of a life I hadn't yet started to live. It was on a side street, tucked between a fish market and a chandlery, that I saw it, a small shop with a faded blue awning. Crow's Nest Art Supplies. I stopped. My feet felt rooted to the cracked pavement. Through the glass, I could see stacks of canvases, jars crowded with brushes of every size, and a glorious, chaotic rainbow of paint tubes. A wave of something sharp and painful and full of longing washed over me. It was a feeling so old I barely recognized it. I had been a painter once. Before I was a wife, before I was a project manager, before my life became an exercise in logistics, I was a painter. In college, my fingers were perpetually stained with ultramarine and cadmium yellow. My world was about light and shadow and the satisfying scrape of a palette knife across a canvas. I remembered my first date with Ethan. I had taken him to my studio, a messy, wonderful space that smelled of linseed oil and turpentine. He had looked at my half-finished canvases, his head tilted. "This is great," he'd said. "A really nice hobby." A hobby. I had bristled even then, but I'd let it go. He was a business major. He saw the world in spreadsheets and bottom lines. To him, anything that didn't generate income was a hobby. Later, when we got married and moved into our first apartment, he'd been concerned about the smell of the oils. He suggested I try watercolors, less mess. When we bought the house, my designated studio space in the basement somehow became his workshop for the boat he was restoring. I didn't fight it. By then, I was already the glue. I was the one who made things work. And a painter was not a practical thing to be. I had taught him that my art was disposable, another item to be deprioritized in the face of more pressing, more practical concerns. I had packed my supplies into boxes, and for 12 years, they had sat in a corner of the attic gathering dust. I hadn't just put away my brushes, I had put away a person. I had forgotten her completely. My hand was on the door of the art supply shop before I had made a conscious decision to enter. The bell chimed, the same sound as the inn, and a young woman with a pierced nose looked up from her sketchbook. "Can I help you find something?" I looked at the easels, at the giant, intimidating canvases. It was too much. It felt like trying to run a marathon when I hadn't even learned to walk again. My eyes scanned the shelves, looking for something smaller, something manageable, and then I saw them. A neat stack of sketchbooks, their covers a plain sturdy black. Beside them, a box of drawing pencils, perfectly sharpened. It wasn't a canvas. It wasn't paint. It wasn't a declaration that I was a painter again. It was a key, a small, simple key to a room inside myself that I had locked long ago. "Just this, please," I said, placing a sketchbook and a single 2B pencil on the counter. That evening, I didn't turn on the light in my room. I sat in the armchair by the open window, the cool sea breeze washing over me. The sketchbook lay unopened in my lap. The pencil was beside it. In the harbor below, the lights of the boats began to twinkle on, casting shimmering reflections on the dark water. I didn't draw. I didn't need to. Not yet. For the first time in a very long time, I was looking at a blank page and seeing not an obligation, but a possibility. The light was different here, softer. It wasn't the filtered, suburban light of my bedroom at home, but a pale, watery silver that seemed to rise from the sea itself, pressing gently against the window pane of my room at the guest house. I had slept, not the thin, restless sleep of a manager whose mind is always cataloging tomorrow's tasks, but a deep, dreamless plunge into quiet. For the first time in years, I woke up feeling not a sense of duty, but a sense of possibility. The guest house was called the Turn's Nest, a name that felt fitting. I was a bird that had flown an unfamiliar route, temporarily roosting in a place I didn't belong, but felt strangely safe. On the small oak desk beside the window sat the sketchbook. It was a stark white rectangle in the gentle light, an object that was both an invitation and an accusation. I had bought it, but I had not yet opened it. I made myself a cup of tea from the electric kettle provided, the simple ritual feeling like an anchor. I didn't have to consider Ethan's coffee preferences or whether the milk was about to expire. The tea was for me. The warmth in my hands was for me. My phone, which I had left on the desk, remained silent. A part of me, the old conditioned part, felt a phantom anxiety at the lack of alerts. The cruise director in me was accustomed to constant pings for information and approval. But the silence wasn't empty. It was spacious. It felt like the sky looked here in Port Blossom vast and open and all mine. I left the sketchbook on the desk and walked out into the morning. Port Blossom was waking up slowly. The air smelled of salt and damp stone and something vaguely floral from the hardy, wind-beaten gardens in front of the small cottages. I followed a narrow lane down to the harbor. It wasn't a place of sleek yachts, but of working fishing boats, their hulls painted in chipped but cheerful shades of blue and red. Gulls cried overhead, their calls sharp and lonely. I walked along the seawall, my hands shoved into the pockets of the new fleece I'd bought yesterday. My pace was my own. It was a revelation. This simple act, for 12 years, My pace had been a compromise. I'd learned to walk a step slower than I wanted to accommodate Ethan's ambling, or a step faster to get to a reservation on time. I was always adjusting, a human metronome for our life together. Here, my feet found their own rhythm on the stones. It was steady, it was unhurried. I found a small, pebbled beach tucked between two rocky outcrops. The tide was out, leaving a glistening expanse of stone, seaweed, and tidal pools. I sat on a large, smooth piece of driftwood, the damp chill seeping through my jeans, and just watched the water. The waves weren't the dramatic, crashing kind. They were small and persistent, a gentle, rhythmic shooshing against the shore. Shh, shh, shh. It sounded like a mantra against the creeping dread I had lived with for so long. The sketchbook was still in my mind, a blank page. For years, my life had been anything but a blank page. It was a day planner filled to the margins, every slot accounted for, every hour assigned a task for someone else's benefit. The thought of all that empty white space was terrifying. What if I had nothing to put there? What if the person I was, the one before the wife and the manager and the shock absorber, was gone for good? I remembered one of my last paintings. I was 28, and we had just moved into our first house. I'd set up a small easel in the spare room. I had painted the view from the window, a gnarly old oak tree. I'd been so proud of it, the way I'd captured the texture of the bark, the complex dance of light and shadow in the leaves. I had called Ethan in to see it. He stood there for a moment, his phone still half in his hand. "Oh wow, that's nice, honey," he'd said, his eyes already drifting toward the doorway. "Really good. Hey, did you remember to call the gas company about that bill?" I hadn't painted since. He hadn't been cruel. He hadn't told me to stop. It was worse than that, he had been indifferent. My passion was just another piece of scenery in the landscape of his life, a mildly interesting hobby that had no real weight or importance. And I, in my endless quest to be the easy, understanding partner, had quietly packed the paints away. I had taught him that it was okay to be indifferent. I had taught him that my passions were disposable. The tide was beginning to turn, the water creeping a little higher up the stones. I knew I had to go back. I had to open the book. Back in my room, the sketchbook was waiting. My heart was thudding with a strange, quiet fear. It felt more significant than leaving my husband, more definitive than canceling my flight. This was a confrontation with myself. I sat at the desk, opened the book to the first page, and picked up the pencil. The paper was smooth and perfect. For a full 10 minutes, I just stared at it. The voice of the inner critic, so well fed by years of neglect, was screaming. "You've forgotten how. It will be terrible. Who do you think you are?" I thought about Ethan's texts, the anger, the confusion. "You're acting like a child, Rachel." Maybe this was childish, but children draw without fear. They make marks on a page because it feels good, not because they're trying to create a masterpiece. With a hand that trembled slightly, I drew a line, just a single, wavering line, then another. I wasn't trying to draw anything in particular. I was just reintroducing my hand to my mind. I drew the curve of a shell I'd seen on the beach, the jagged shape of a rock, the gentle arc of a wave. They were clumsy, hesitant things, the sketches of a stranger, but they were mine. The friction of graphite on paper was a sensory anchor, a real thing in a world that had become abstract. I wasn't managing, I wasn't planning, I was creating. I lost track of time. It might have been 20 minutes or an hour. I was so absorbed in the simple act of looking and translating that I jumped. When my phone, silent until now, began to vibrate violently on the desk, it wasn't a text, it was a call. Ethan. I stared at his name, the block capitals feeling aggressive, demanding. My first instinct, a Pavlovian response honed over a decade, was to answer, to smooth it over, to absorb the panic I knew would be on the other end of the line. I didn't. I watched the phone buzz and shake, a furious little fit on the polished wood until it finally fell silent. A profound sense of power settled over me. It wasn't a triumphant, fist-pumping feeling. It was quiet. It was the simple, solid power of a choice made entirely for myself. A minute later, a new text message appeared. Not from Ethan. It was from my younger sister, Claire. My blood ran cold for a second. He had escalated. He was pulling other people in, activating the network, the system I used to manage. Claire's text read, Rachel, are you okay? Ethan just called mom and dad. He's frantic. He said you disappeared. What is going on? Please call me. I read the message twice. The old me would have been mortified. I would have been drowning in shame, imagining my parents' worried faces, my sister's confusion. I would have felt the crushing weight of their concern, a concern orchestrated by my husband. He wasn't just looking for me. He was making my private rebellion a public crisis. He was using my family's love for me as a tool to force my hand. It was the tactic of a man who had lost control of his primary asset. But I wasn't the old me. I looked at the text, at Ethan's frantic second-hand desperation, and I felt a startling clarity. He wasn't worried about me. He was terrified of the gaping hole I had left in the structure of his own comfort. He hadn't called my sister because he thought she would know some secret place I'd run to. He had called her and my parents to create pressure, to make my quiet departure so loud and chaotic that I would have to rush back to silence it. He was trying to make me the shock absorber again, even from a distance. I took a deep breath. I typed a reply to Claire. I'm safe and I'm okay. I just need some time. I will explain later. Please don't worry. I sent it. Then I did something I had never done before. I located Ethan's contact in my phone. My thumb hovered over the button, the finality of it making my pulse race. Block. The pop-up asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to block this contact? I was the family's cruise director. I was the glue. I was the planner. I was the woman who had just blocked her husband's number. I pressed the button. A deep, shuddering breath escaped my lungs. The silence in the room was no longer just spacious. It was absolute. I looked down at the open sketchbook, at the clumsy drawings of shells and rocks. They weren't much, but they were a beginning. They were proof I was here. And I was not going back. Not yet, maybe not ever. The bell above the art supply store's door chimed softly as I stepped back onto the street, the sound swallowed by the cry of a distant gull. In my tote bag, the sketchbook and pencil were a dense, solid weight. For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to create a plan, to schedule a time and place for this new activity. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Sketching. It was the cruise director in me, the part that believed an unscheduled moment was a wasted one. I stopped myself. That was the old programming. That was Ethan's pace, a life broken into billable hours and efficient transitions. My pace, I was learning, was slower. It was the pace of the tide, the drift of the clouds. I walked without a destination, letting the salty air guide me. Port Blossom was a town built of weathered shingles and determined sea-strafe gardens. It was a place that had learned to bend with the wind instead of breaking. I passed a small bookshop with a cat sleeping in the window, a bakery venting the warm, yeasty scent of fresh bread, and a tiny gallery showcasing watercolors of the local coastline. I didn't feel the need to go into any of them. It was enough just to see them, to know they were there. My feet eventually led me to the harbor, a working place of creaking docks and the low thrum of idling boat engines. I found a wooden bench at the end of a long pier, set apart from the main thoroughfare. It looked out not at the town, but at the vast gray-blue expanse of the ocean. It was perfect. I sat, placing the tote bag beside me. For a long time, I just watched the water. The sea was a restless thing, constantly turning over its thoughts. It was a comfort. It didn't demand an answer or an explanation. It simply was. Finally, I reached into the bag and pulled out the sketchbook. The cover was a blank textured black. It felt foreign in my hands, a tool from a past life. I opened it to the first page. The clean white emptiness of it was intimidating. It was a void, a pristine surface waiting to be marked, and I was terrified I would ruin it. I took out one of the charcoal sticks. It felt clumsy and thick between my fingers. My hand, which for 12 years had been so adept at signing permission slips, making grocery lists, and tapping out polite emails, had forgotten this language. I tried to draw the horizon. The line came out wobbly and faint, a weak tremor across the page. It was pathetic. I could feel a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. The old voices started immediately, a chorus of polite discouragement. My mother years ago, looking at a canvas I'd been working on in my college apartment. It's very expressive, dear, but is it practical? What kind of a living can you make from that? And then Ethan. The memory was so clear it felt present. We had been married for 2 years, living in our first house. I had claimed the small spare bedroom as a studio. It was my one condition for the house, the one thing I had insisted upon. For a while, it was my sanctuary. The sharp, clean scent of turpentine and linseed oil was the smell of my own mind. One Saturday, Ethan stood in the doorway, a wrinkle in his brow. He wasn't angry. He was never overtly angry in the beginning. He was just concerned. "Rach, we have my boss coming for dinner next month," he'd said, gesturing vaguely at my easel and the canvases stacked against the wall. "This room is right off the dining area. It's just a lot." I looked around at my work, at the organized chaos of my passion. "It's my studio, Ethan." I know, he said, holding his hands up in that placating way of his. "And I love that you have a hobby. It's great. But it smells a little strong and it looks messy." He gave me a gentle, reasonable smile. The kind of smile that made you feel unreasonable for disagreeing. "Could we just tidy it up a bit? Maybe pack some of it away, just until after the dinner party?" I was the shock absorber. I was the glue. I said, "Okay." I packed the paints into a box. I took the canvases off the easel and slid them under the bed. I scrubbed the floor until the smell of turpentine was replaced with lemon-scented cleaner. His boss came for dinner, complimented the tidiness of our home, and the subject of my studio never came up again. The boxes stayed under the bed. The room slowly, inevitably became a storage space for things we didn't know where else to put. An old exercise bike, holiday decorations, things that were more practical. Ethan had never told me to stop painting. He just made it inconvenient. He had curated my life until there was no room left for the mess of creation. He had praised my efficiency, my management of the household, my support of his career. He had complimented the frame, and I had cut away the canvas to make it fit. The charcoal stick snapped in my hand. I looked down at the 2 pieces in my palm, then at the pathetic, shaky line on the page. I felt a surge of something cold and pure. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was resolve. I threw the broken pieces of charcoal into the water. I heard them make 2 tiny, distinct splashes. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled another stick from the box. I wasn't going to draw the horizon. I wasn't going to try to capture the whole overwhelming ocean. I wasn't going to create a masterpiece. I was going to draw the thing right in front of me. My eyes landed on a thick, rusted mooring cleat, bolted to the pier a few feet away. It was pitted and scarred from years of weather and use. A length of old, frayed rope was still looped around it, forgotten. It was ugly and ignored and essential. It was a thing built to hold fast. I started to draw it. My hand still felt unsure, but this time I didn't care. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just trying to be honest. I sketched the rough, oxidized texture of the iron. I drew the thick, heavy bolts that held it to the weathered wood. I spent 10 minutes on the fraying end of the rope, trying to capture the way each individual fiber seemed to have its own story of strain. The world narrowed. The gulls, the boats, the town, it all faded into a low peripheral hum. There was only the rough surface of the paper, the satisfying grit of the charcoal, and the object in front of me. My hands started to remember. The curve of the cleat's horns, the deep shadows underneath, the way the light hit one of the bolt heads. It wasn't a pretty picture. It was stark and a little grim, but it was real. When I was done, I leaned back and looked at it. My heart was pounding, not with anxiety, but with a quiet, powerful hum. I had made something. It wasn't for Ethan's boss, or for my mother's approval, or for a grade. It was just for me. It was a declaration. I exist. I am here. As if summoned by the thought, my phone vibrated in my pocket. For a second, my stomach clenched with the old familiar dread. Ethan. But it couldn't be him. I had blocked him. I pulled the phone out. The screen showed a text message from my sister, Sarah. "Mom called me. She's hysterical. Said Ethan is worried sick. Are you okay? Call me." I read the message twice. Hysterical, worried sick. It was the same language of crisis they had always used to pull me back into line. It was the emergency broadcast system designed to override my own needs. In the past, it would have worked. I would have felt the guilt, the immediate sense of responsibility for their feelings. I would have called, my voice full of apologies, ready to absorb their panic. I looked from the phone screen to the drawing in my lap. The rusted cleat, the frayed rope. I held my ground. I thought for a long moment about what to write. Not an apology, not an over-explanation. Just a boundary. I was learning that a boundary wasn't a wall to punish others. It was a line to protect myself. My thumbs moved slowly, deliberately, over the keyboard. I am safe and I am okay. This is something I need to do for myself. I will call you when I am ready. Please tell Mom and Dad the same. Please respect this. I hit send before the cruise director in my head could second guess it. I put the phone on silent and slipped it back into my bag. It felt like another lock clicking into place. I had managed Ethan. I had managed my parents. I had managed my home. I was done managing other people's feelings. I closed the sketchbook, the drawing of the cleat safe inside. I didn't have a plan for dinner. I didn't know where I would sleep in a week. I didn't know if my marriage was over or just broken. But as I stood up from the bench and walked back toward the quiet streets of the town, I wasn't afraid. The weight in my tote bag no longer felt like a brick of expectation. It felt like an anchor. The silence was the first thing I noticed. For 3 days, my phone had been a source of constant buzzing anxiety, a relentless stream of notifications that charted Ethan's journey from confusion to indignant anger to cloying, desperate pleas. Blocking his number wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It was a quiet click of a button, done while sitting on the edge of a floral bedspread in a town he didn't know existed. But the resulting silence was vast. It was a physical presence in the room, a space that opened up where the dread used to be. I had expected to feel a tremor of fear, a pang of regret. I had been one half of a whole for 12 years. Severing that connection, even temporarily, felt like it should have been a violent act, but it wasn't. It was just quiet. I picked up the sketchbook from the nightstand. The paper was smooth and clean, a field of intimidating white. The graphite pencils were still in their plastic sleeve, their points uniformly sharp and perfect. It had been years since I'd held tools like these with any intent. Art had been the first thing I'd packed away when Ethan and I got serious. It wasn't a conscious decision, not really. It was just impractical. It took up space. It took up time. It was a messy, solitary pursuit that didn't fit into the neat shared blueprint of our life. My life became about us. A hobby for me felt selfish. I had taught myself that it was selfish. My hand hesitated over the first page. For a decade, every creative impulse I'd had was channeled into something for the family. Planning themed birthday parties for our nieces and nephews, designing the perfect holiday card, arranging photo albums that told a story of flawless domestic happiness. I was the curator of our shared life, the director. I had forgotten how to create something with no audience in mind. I slid one of the pencils from its sleeve. A 2B, soft, forgiving. I looked out the window of the inn. My room faced a narrow side street, a quiet artery of port blossom. An old gnarled oak tree reached its branches toward my window, its leaves just beginning to blush. With the first hints of autumn, I drew a line, and there in another. My hand was clumsy, the motion stiff and unfamiliar. The perspective was slightly off, the shading amateurish. It looked nothing like the confident sketches I'd made in college, the ones that had earned me praise and a scholarship I'd ultimately abandoned. This drawing was tentative, it was hesitant. It was the work of a stranger, but it was mine. I didn't try to fix it. I just let it be what it was. A crooked tree on a quiet street. I closed the sketchbook and felt a feeling I couldn't immediately name. It wasn't pride, not yet. It was more like an echo. A faint signal from a person I used to be. The next morning, I left the inn with the sketchbook tucked under my arm. The air was cool and carried the sharp, clean scent of salt and low tide. Port Blossom wasn't a resort town. It was a working town that happened to be beautiful. Fishing boats with peeling paint bobbed in the harbor, their nets piled on the docks like sleeping stringy beasts. Gulls cried overhead, their calls sharp and lonely. I had no plan, no itinerary. This in itself was a revolution. My entire adult life had been a series of lists and schedules. I knew how to manage a day down to the minute. I knew how to optimize a grocery run, how to coordinate 3 different family schedules, how to book flights that accounted for every possible delay. I was the family's cruise director. Now I just walked. My pace was slow. I stopped to watch a man mending a lobster trap, his fingers moving with a practiced, unhurried rhythm. I spent 10 minutes studying the faded lettering on the side of a brick building that had once been a cannery. I found myself in a small, crowded bookstore and bought a novel by an author I'd never heard of, simply because I liked the cover. There was no one to check in with, no one's preferences to consider, no one asking what's next or are you getting hungry? The only rhythm I had to attend to was my own, and I was discovering it was a much slower, more contemplative tempo than I had ever allowed myself. Down a street lined with small independent shops, I saw a simple wooden sign, Tideline Gallery. On a whim, I pushed open the heavy door, a small bell announcing my arrival. The gallery was one long light-filled room. It was filled with the work of local artists, moody seascapes in oil, abstract sculptures of driftwood and sea glass, delicate watercolors of shorebirds. It was quiet, reverent. An older woman with a cascade of silver hair pinned up with a wooden clasp sat behind a simple desk, reading. She looked up and gave me a small warm smile before returning to her book, leaving me to wander. I moved through the space, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. It was the ghost of an old ambition. This was the world I had once wanted to be a part of, not just to appreciate it, but to contribute to it. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was about 5 years into our marriage. I had seen an ad for a weekend watercolor workshop in a town a few hours away. The excitement was a physical jolt. I had pictured the brushes, the wet paper, the way the colors would bleed into each other. I had imagined having a weekend that was just for me. I brought it up to Ethan over dinner. I was thinking of signing up for this, I'd said, my voice betraying my eagerness. It's an art workshop, just for a weekend. He had been scrolling through something on his phone, half listening. Oh yeah? Cool, he'd said, his eyes still on the screen. It's next month. I'd have to book a room for 2 nights. He finally looked up then, a small frown line appearing between his brows. It was his logistics frown, the one that appeared when a problem was presented. Next month? Isn't that when my cousin's engagement party is? I had already checked. No, that's the weekend after. Oh, well, I mean a whole weekend. He put his phone down. That's a lot of time. And it's probably expensive, right? For a hobby. A hobby. The word landed like a stone. It wasn't meant to be cruel. In his mind, it was a simple statement of fact. My art was a hobby. His golf trips were networking. His weekend fishing with friends was essential downtime. My desire to paint was a triviality, an indulgence that had to be weighed against cost and time and practicality. I just thought it would be nice, I said, the enthusiasm draining from my voice. It is nice, Rach. It's a great idea, he said, ever the supportive husband in theory. But the timing is tough. We've got that party, and I think I have that big project kicking off at work. The house would be a mess. What about Scout? He'd added, referring to our golden retriever. I was the shock absorber. I was the one who smoothed things over. I saw the obstacles he was laying down, the gentle, reasonable arguments that were really just walls. And I did what I always did. I capitulated. You're right, I'd said, forcing a smile. It's not a great time. Maybe some other time. He smiled back, relieved. The problem was solved. He picked up his phone again. Yeah, definitely. Some other time. But some other time never came. I never brought it up again. I had taken the hurt, the quiet dismissal of my passion, and I had filed it away under circumstances and bad timing. I had absorbed the disappointment so we wouldn't have to feel the slightest bit of guilt. It was a system, and I was the one who kept it running. Find anything that speaks to you? The gallery owner's voice pulled me from the memory. I blinked, realizing I'd been staring at a small, intense painting of a storm-tossed sea for a long time. It's all beautiful, I said, my voice a little thick. Her eyes drifted down to the sketchbook under my arm. Are you an artist yourself? The question hung in the air. The old me, the Rachel of a week ago, would have laughed it off. Oh no, I just doodle. I would have minimized it, made it small and unimportant, made it a hobby. I met her gaze. I used to be, I said. The words felt strange and true. I'm trying to be again. She gave me a knowing look, a deep and genuine smile that reached her eyes. That's the best reason to carry a sketchbook, she said. The trying is the whole point. I left the gallery and walked toward the water, her words echoing in my mind. I found an old wooden bench at the end of a pier, the waves lapping at the pilings below. I sat down and opened the sketchbook to a new page. I thought of Ethan. I imagined his panic was curdling into rage by now. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the disruption. The system was broken. The cruise director had abandoned ship and he was left standing on the deck, realizing he didn't know how to read the maps. He didn't even know where the maps were kept. I looked out at the endless expanse of gray-blue water. With a steady hand, I drew the horizon line. It wasn't perfectly straight. It didn't need to be. It was a start. The drawing wasn't for him. It wasn't for a gallery wall. It wasn't for anyone. It was for me.